This is 9/11 Freefall.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. My name is Andy Steele. I'm the host. Tonight we're going to be joined by Roland Angle. He's a civil engineer, and Dan Barnum, a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. Both of them are part of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And we're going to be talking about the Plasco Building. In case you're not aware what the Plasco Building is, the Plasco Building is a building in Iran. Last week, caught on fire and came down. Many people died, a terrible, tragic incident. We're going to be analyzing that. Of course, AE 9/11 Truth has issued a press release. We got our own suspicions about this building, questions that are unanswered as of yet. We'll be going over that press release as well. So all of that is going to be coming your way. Stay tuned.
The views expressed on this show by guests and the host on issues outside of the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence are the opinions of those individuals alone and do not necessarily reflect those of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth.
All right, welcome back to the show, ladies and gentlemen. So I wanted to bring you up to speed, if you're not already, on what we're talking about. What is the Plasco Building? Plasco Building was a building, again, in Iran that fell. It was about 17 stories and fell after it caught on fire. So Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth put out a press release the next morning, and I'm going to share that with you right now. It's titled, Tehran Building Collapse. Investigators Must Consider Explosives, says Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. At approximately 11:30 a.m. local time yesterday in Tehran, an iconic 17-story high-rise known as the Plasco Building tragically collapsed after being on fire for some 3.5 hours. It is not yet known how many firefighters and civilians were killed, but early reports say that anywhere from 20 to 50 are feared dead. Based on preliminary analysis of many videos of the collapse, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, a nonprofit that represents more than 2,750 architects and engineers who are calling for a new investigation of the 2001 World Trade Center disaster, strongly urges President Rouhani, Iranian authorities, and the people of Iran to thoroughly investigate the possible use of explosives in the Plasco Building's shocking demise, and to act swiftly and decisively to preserve the physical evidence. Let us be clear, it is impossible to know at this early stage what caused the structure to suddenly come crashing down. But as with any proper forensic investigation, no plausible scenario should be ruled out, especially when the available data seems to support that scenario. Here are 6 separate videos we have compiled show what appear to be, and in some cases sound like, explosions emanating from the tower in sequential patterns as it began to crumble. The building's tumultuous fall is then accompanied by thick, energetic, rapidly forming plumes that are reminiscent of what we see in controlled demolitions. Further, the BBC reported that the fires were nearly extinguished and that emergency personnel and occupants had begun re-entering the building when the collapse unexpectedly occurred. Indeed, videos display very few flames and a thick black smoke, signs of low-temperature, oxygen-starved fire. Moreover, the inferno was limited to the upper floors, yet the entire 17 stories came down in just a few seconds. We at AE 9/11 Truth are all too familiar with events in which a prematurely formed narrative makes it harder to subsequently ascertain what truly happened. We therefore adamantly caution against rushing to any conclusions as investigators work to uncover the truth surrounding this national tragedy in Iran. Should the Plasco Building collapse be found to have been caused by pre-placed explosives, sadly it will not be the first time that explosives were used to bring down a burning high-rise while people were still inside. So that is the press release, folks. That is the situation, and that is what we will be talking about tonight with Roland Angle and Dan Barnum. I'm going to play that interview for you right now. All right, I am joined by two great professionals who have been on this program in the past. First, we have Dan Barnum. He's an FAIA out of Houston, Texas. He holds a Bachelor of Architecture degree from Rice University. He's been practicing architecture for the past 40 years, and he's designed a variety of buildings, from houses to high-rise office buildings. Among his major projects are One Shell Plaza and Two Shell Plaza in downtown Houston, and the Houston Lighting and Power, which is now the Houston Public Works office building. So you're probably familiar with it if you live in Houston. Dan is a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, as I stated before, and that's the highest honor that can be bestowed on any of its members. He's joined today by Roland Angle. Roland was a guest on the show a few weeks ago. He's a graduate of the University of California. He's been a civil engineer for over 40 years. His practice has included the design and testing of structures designed to withstand blasts, such as the launch facilities for the Minuteman missile system. They had to withstand a nuclear blast, if things had ever come to that point here in our world situation. And in Roland's 6 years of Green Beret training in the use of demolitions, he attacked structures, then analyzed their weak points, which taught him where to place explosives so that the structures would fail. So some great wealth of knowledge from both of these two great individuals today. We're going to be talking about a different building collapse today, the one that took place in Iran on January the 19th, just last week. But first of all, I just want to say welcome back to 9/11 Freefall, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so details are slow in coming, at least to myself, on this building collapse in Iran. So we're going to start with Roland. What are some of the details that you have so far about what took place on January 19th?
I've been looking at as many videos as I can find that recorded the collapse of the building. And the information that we can get from that, I've also been speaking with other people in our community, the AE 9/11 Truth community, who have been engaged in similar activities. So what we know is that this is a building that was built in the early 60s, and it's variously listed as either 15 stories high or 17 stories high. I believe the 15-story high information is correct from what I've been able to determine looking at the photos that I have of the building and from the information about the height of the building. If it were 17 stories high and the height of the information, which is given as 40 meters, was correct, then it wouldn't be 15 stories. The stories would be too short. So it's a steel frame building, and it has been the site of commercial activity since its inception, since it was built, primarily textile manufacturers and dealers, merchants inside the building. It has apparently been neglected to a great extent in the last few years, at least. There are reports of complaints about the building not being maintained properly, about fire hazards in the building due to the many textiles that are stored there in an unsafe manner, in an unsafe environment in terms of fire protection. So the building itself was an iconic, they refer to it as an iconic building because it was one of the first high-rise buildings built in Tehran at that time. And it was built by a businessman who was later executed by the regime for being a spy. He was accused of being a spy and executed. So there's a very political kind of twist to this story in terms of its background. And we are concerned that since the building collapsed in a manner which only took not more than 15 seconds once the collapse was initiated, that this is another example of what we would determine as a controlled demolition. That's our take on it based upon the information that we have so far. But this is just a preliminary kind of an appraisal. We're hoping that the Iranian government will conduct a thorough investigation of the forensic evidence, that is the wreckage, as well as the videos and the audio tapes and the eyewitness reports, and the building's history. What code was it built to? How clearly was the construction monitored? What kind of quality control did they have? These are all questions that have to be looked into before we can come up with a definitive answer. But right now, what we see is we hear in the audio tapes a series of sounds which sound like explosions. We see a series of squibs coming from the sides of the building that appear to be the result of explosions. And the manner in which the building collapsed would indicate that it may very well be a controlled demolition. That's our preliminary take on it. We're hoping that the Iranian government will follow up with a very thorough investigation, which the president has called for. But the negative side of that is that the intelligence minister, who was given the task of conducting the investigation, has already given signs that they don't feel that there was any sabotage or deliberate destruction of the building. He's issued a statement already 2 days after the event that they will investigate, but he specifically says, at least this is what was repeated in the press, quote, "In the early hours of the incident, there were speculations of a terrorist attack. However, all the signs and evidence were examined and its possibility was rejected." We think that's a rush to judgment, and it's not indicative that a thorough investigation is going to take place when statements like that are being issued 2 days after the event. So that's pretty much what we know.
All right, and I think that is a huge rush to judgment as well, particularly when you are doing an investigation. And, I'm just looking at what I saw that morning when the people were writing to us about this building, and we looked up other videos of it. And certainly when I see this building come down, before it comes down, I see explosions far below where the fires are currently happening. That is something that should absolutely be looked at by every person, with no opinions, no preset notions of what happened in this building, but look at the video that was put out by AE 9/11 Truth, the compilation, and ask yourself, what does it look like, is happening to this building? And again, a lot of our, studies are very preliminary right now. Everybody's looking into this for the first time. It just happened. I mean, part of the issue is that when 9/11 happened, all eyes were on this major world event. Here we are with this Iranian building collapse, and it's gotten some media coverage, but there isn't going to be as much information available, at least at this stage, as there was on 9/11, and certainly by the time AE 9/11 Truth was formed. When people were already studying Building 7 and all of those other things having to do with the towers. Dan, I'm going to turn to you now. Just as Roland did right now, I want to get your preliminary thoughts on the fall of this building, some of the details that you know, and bring your own wisdom into the discussion here.
Okay, well, I got a call from Kelly who asked me to start looking at it. I had not heard about it at all, and so I started looking. And became immediately interested because she said that our office had gotten calls saying that, well, here's a building that collapsed due to fire, and a steel frame high-rise that collapsed due to fire. And I immediately thought, well, no, steel frame buildings, high-rise buildings don't collapse due to fire. So I took a very close look at it and looked at a couple of the videos and thought, okay, maybe the upper floors, which had burned for a number of hours, they could possibly collapse with that kind of intensity because we'd seen that before, a partial collapse. But then I realized that after the upper floors started to collapse, the lower floors collapsed way too quickly, that there was no resistance offered, or very little resistance offered by the floors below. Very little, if any, resistance offered by the floors below. So there was no resistance to the momentum of the collapse, and that's a big red flag waving for me. So I began to look at more of the videos instead of from just one side, which appears to be the south side of the building, and started looking at the east side. And that's the side where you can really see what appear to be a series of explosions just sort of marching down the side of the building. The squibs of explosive dust popping out of the sides of the building, and this collapse that just all of a sudden happens. And the what I would guess is the front of the building just sort of folds in over the rest of it, and that says to me, okay, the building was imploded. And I spent at least an hour going back and forth looking at all of the different videos that I could find and that were being sent to me by our staff. And the more I looked, the more I thought, okay, this is probably not classic implosion, but implosion, and kept reading reports that it was possibly caused by gas canisters stored within the building. I have spent some time in China and in the Far East in buildings that are probably similar. I've never been into the Middle East, but I look at that and I see a similar construction to what I've seen in the Far East, and I realize that buildings of that age were not built with central heating and air conditioning, and there was probably some of those shops and little manufacturing facilities had propane or butane, and they might have had canisters that were exploding, but that didn't ring true to what I was seeing, because it looked like these were charges that were purposely set next to columns that were sort of pushing the columns out. So the more I looked, the more I thought, okay, what we've got is a pretty classic but crudely done implosion. And I've looked at it over the last few days as we've studied it more, and I'm still pretty much convinced that that's what we've got. So we continue to study it and continue to look at it as more information comes in. And as Roland says, we're hoping that the Iranian government will do a complete and thorough study, and that's what we're pushing for. And I will say that we being AE 9/11 Truth, wouldn't have gotten involved if people hadn't said, oh, look, here's a high-rise building that's steel framed and it's collapsed due to fire. If people hadn't come up and said that sort of contrary to what we believe is not possible, then it would have just been another building fire somewhere in the world, and we would have gone on about our regular daily business.
Right, and there's probably supporters who have to hear people saying, oh, look, here's this building that fell down. Didn't you say no steel frame high-rise ever falls down because of fire? Does that just throw the entire controlled demolition theory out the window? It doesn't, and hopefully we'll be able to get into that a little bit later. But this building is interesting because, yeah, we did get a lot of emails, a lot of videos sent in. We spent a good few hours on Thursday morning, I think it was Thursday, that this happened, looking up videos. And to come to that conclusion, or to have that early hypothesis, I should say, that this looks like a pre-planned demolition is something that, we don't do lightly around here, because there really is no precedence. Forgetting about 9/11, take it right out of the equation. There would be no precedence if 9/11 had never happened for a steel frame high-rise collapsing until 2017. 2017 would have been the first year of something like this happening, if we're to believe what we've been told by the media, what the Iranian government is saying right now on a preliminary basis. This would be the first time, so this would be something that would need to be studied and looked at, and also alternative thoughts about what actually befell this building would have to be considered, because when something happens for the first time, when there's such a precedent of it not happening, you have to wonder if the explanation you're being given of some kind of natural progressive collapse is really possible. It becomes more likely that something else brought it down. And indeed, when you watch the videos, watch that compilation that AE 9/11 Truth put together and sent out in their press release, indeed you see what looks like explosions going off far below where the fires are located. There's a problem with this story that we've been given, just from a common sense perspective, and that's really where we are now in this investigation, because a lot of information is not available yet. It's been difficult to even get a lock on how the building was designed, because, in the case of the Twin Towers, that stuff was pretty much publicly available information. It wasn't hard to get this information and study it, because this was the United States. These are the most iconic buildings in the world, associated with New York City. In the case of the Plasco Building, and this isn't to diminish the tragedy, people died, it's horrible. I feel terrible for the firefighters who lost their lives and the families that mourn them now. But a lot of people, especially on this side of the world, had probably never heard of this building until January 19th. So it's very difficult right now at this early stage to get information on how it was constructed, the exact details of it, and we don't even have really an official story to challenge at this point.
Andy, let me point out something I forgot to say, and that
Sure.
is that we don't even know if we do know that it's a steel frame building, and that's pretty clear from the pictures of the rubble pile, but we don't know if it was even fireproofed. I looked at the steel twisted mess that in the rubble pile, and I didn't see anything that I could figure out was fireproofing on the steel. But it was twisted and turned and had gone through a lot of stuff, but so we don't even know if that steel had been coated with fireproofing, and that would make some difference in terms of what the building would withstand in the way of fire and how robust it was. So there's a lot of stuff that we don't know about the building that and we under normal circumstances probably can't find out.
Right, it's difficult. It's very difficult to get information, the nature of the Iranian government, the fact that a lot of stuff, we can get stuff translated, I'm sure, over the next year, but at this point, early right now, there's a lot of stuff in the Iranian language. So, we're going to have a lot of work to do, and this kind of goes into the next question, which you pointed out, Dan, that I was going to ask. We'll start with Roland. Because when I was in the Peace Corps in Uzbekistan, I would go into houses. These aren't steel frame buildings, obviously, but I would go into houses where there's straw coming out of the wall. And people would tell me, if there's an earthquake, you're done. You're a dead man. This building's going to fall down. So there's different kinds of building standards in different countries. Some countries don't have them to a certain extent. So do you think that different building standards in Iran, if you know anything about them, may have had a role in what we saw last Thursday?
I think, obviously, they had to have had an effect. Building codes are, and to the extent to which they're enforced, are the main factor in determining how safe these public buildings are. So that's a big question. I don't think it's going to be a while before we get that kind of answer. The building was apparently constructed by a large international construction firm. I'm looking for that information right now, but I've seen them claim credit for building the building back in the early 60s. And who knows, certainly I don't believe that we have the capability right now to know what the building codes looked like in Tehran in 1960, nor the extent to which they were enforced, which is also usually a big question. Even the building codes in the United States, the building code is set up in different zones. For instance, the zones out here in California there's a high probability of earthquakes. So the structures are designed much more robustly in terms of their ability to withstand what amounts to a sideways horizontal force on the building as a result of earthquakes. So, yeah, the building codes are a big factor, and that's one of the things that we have to look carefully at. And as Dan points out, the fireproofing, I'm pretty sure that building was not fireproofed in any sense of what we would consider to be fireproofing today. So those are definitely factors to be looked at, but I don't think they detract from the observation that we had what appears to be explosions going on far below the area of where the fire was confined. The fire was confined to the top 4 or 5 stories of the building, and yet during the collapse sequence, we see squibs occurring at lower elevations. So how do you explain that? There's no other rational explanation that I can think of than that there were explosives placed there to weaken the building so that it would collapse.
Dan, what's your thought about different building standards in other countries and if that could have played a role?
Well, I have been fortunate enough to travel internationally, and being an architect, it is just my natural proclivity to look at buildings. I told my wife when I married her to just expect that when I go into a building, the first thing I'm going to look at is how would I remodel it. So I'd look at how buildings are built and how they're put together. And so every country, until recently, and 10 years ago or so, we created an international building code. So I'm going to go back before the international building code, and we had every country had a different building code, and everything was different. And I don't really know what it was like in the Middle East. I know that in the Far East, that most buildings were built with concrete frame, a reinforced concrete frame. I spent quite a bit of time in Vietnam and watched buildings being built there. I spent a fair amount of time in Japan and watched buildings being built there. Also, concrete was widely used there. Whereas here, when I entered the architecture profession in the mid-60s, we were mostly using steel, but we also used reinforced concrete. The the one shell building that Andy mentioned in introducing me, which was for years the tallest building in Houston, was reinforced concrete at 50-something stories. But all of our steel buildings in this country that I know of were reinforced. Were fireproofed in one way or another, and we fireproof with concrete. We fireproof with sprayed-on fireproofing, or we fireproof with wrapping the steel with basically with sheetrock, with what's commonly called sheetrock or gypsum board. In other countries, they use different products, typically probably sprayed-on fireproofing. But my guess is that in the early 1960s in Tehran, they probably didn't fireproof steel. And I know that in this country, there were some steel frame buildings that weren't fireproofed back in the 60s, and that was a problem. And so our code was changed. And but we don't know. And that's something that we hope to be able to find out. But I think it's important that what Roland said is that we can see in the photographs that there was a raging fire above the 9th floor, maybe the 8th floor, 9th, 10th, up to the top, but nothing below that. And then all of a sudden there's explosions or big puffs of dust and stuff coming out from below that.
Roland, I know you've been researching this for a few days here. What are some of the alternate theories that you've heard? Again, we don't have an official story yet. We may not get one for a long time. We may not get one at all, depending on how fast Iran government puts this behind it. But what are some of the theories that you've heard put out for why this building suddenly came down? Why don't they hold water, in your view?
The first reaction that I heard, that I was exposed to, was that the building was old and built more than 50 years ago and was in poor condition, that the maintenance had not been done properly, that the fire systems were not up to date, and that was the reason why the building fell down. That was the first explanation that I heard. Then I heard, well, there were lots of combustibles stored in the building. It's primarily a textile building. Textile manufacturers, textile merchants, they had a lot of clothing and cloth and other combustibles stored in unsafe manner throughout the building, and that because of the great quantity of combustibles in the building, that created the conditions for a widespread fire, and that was what caused the building to come down. The third thing that I heard was that there was no central heating in the building. It was designed that way. Therefore, all these small firms, of which there were dozens and dozens of small firms in the building, each had their own heater. Their heaters were often utilized gasoline or propane, and that these heaters, once they caught fire and their fuel tanks caught fire, created explosions, and these explosions were what caused the building to come down. And then there were, shortly after that, the discussions about terrorism, and there is a suspicion that terrorism is involved in bringing the building down. So those are the events that I heard of.
Right, but none of those gets into why we're seeing explosions go off at the bottom while the fire is raging at the top, and it just does seem mistimed to me. For instance, even if you go with the heaters being in each floor, I mean, why would a heater at the bottom go off because of a fire happening at the top, and why would they be all going off consecutively? This doesn't really, like, these theories, I mean, they're interesting, and of course people are going to speculate in the early stages of something like this happening, and there's nothing wrong with doing that because it's an interesting issue and people are naturally curious, but it doesn't account for what we saw. And again, it's one of those things. It's like watching Building 7 come down for the first time. You just instinctively know there's something off about this, that what you're being told doesn't fall in line with your own common sense. And again, why are there explosions going off at the base of this building, or pretty close to the base, and before the whole thing comes down, especially when the fire is far above it? Dan, what are some of the theories? I'll have you elaborate on Roland's point there. But, some of the theories that you heard, why do you think they don't hold any water?
Well, I'm not going to elaborate too much on what Roland said, but because I fully agree on all of that. But one of the things we heard yesterday in the discussion that we were having was that somebody pointed out that the fire department was pouring an awful lot of water into the upper floors, and wouldn't that amount of water cause extra weight? Well, no. Although water is pretty heavy, dissipated over the area of the floor of the building, and I will point out that we don't know the floor area. We can sort of guess. But I haven't even seen what I would think of as an accurate guess of the floor area. But we'd have to pour oceans of water onto a floor before it would be enough to weigh a floor down and cause it to collapse. So that, to pardon the pun, but that doesn't hold water. There's an awful lot of speculation, and it's just speculation, and it's just a lot of guesswork until we can get some more information. One of the things that I would really like to see is we've seen what I think of as the east side of the building with the explosions coming down the side sort of sequentially. I would love to see the west side of the building. See videos of that, and I haven't seen that, to see if we see the same kind of thing happening. Maybe there was nobody taking a video from that side, but if so, I would like to see it. The other thing that was also pointed out in the discussion that we had yesterday is that in the pictures of the building after the collapse is that the front of the building is sort of folded over the top of the rubble pile, and that is a classic demolition picture, because what happens in the demolition is that you collapse the core and pull the walls, particularly the wall facing the street, you pull it into the building so that it doesn't fall into the street, and that seems to be what happened. And if this is a random act, then that's not going to happen that way. Anytime you see a building imploded, if it's done the way they want it to happen, and not all of them do happen the way people want them to happen, but then it will fall in its own footprint, or it will fall in a specific direction, and it doesn't typically fall into the street because they don't want to block the street. And this is the classic case of that, because the whole front of the building fell over top of the rubble pile, and it doesn't block the street. So that says this is not a random act. This is not a random fire that caused a building to collapse, because if it were, then that collapse would have fallen all over the place, and that's not what happened.
Indeed. So what should Iranian officials be looking for in their forensic investigation? Let's say that they are hearing this broadcast now, they understand what we're saying. We'll start with Roland. If you were on that team, what should be one of the first things that they're looking for as they go over the rubble pile?
They would be looking for any structural member that shows signs that it was exposed to high-energy explosives. That would be pretty. A fire is not going to cause that kind of damage to steel members. Fire might bend it, might cause certain change in the molecular structure, but it's not going to exhibit the signs of a blast, of an explosion, which is going to leave very telltale signs. And they would want to look at the critical connections where the loads of the building were concentrated, because those are the areas that would be attacked with explosives. The connections where the floor trusses are connected to the columns and the beams are connected to the floor members. These are areas that you would want to inspect carefully. You want to preserve those. You want to test them for chemical traces. You want to photograph them. And you want to build a systematic appraisal of the structural members of the building and what kind of damage they suffered. Then you'd want to look at all the videotapes that you could of the building collapses, so that you could put together a comprehensive look at the way the building collapsed. As Dan pointed out, none of the videos that I saw showed the west side of the building or the north side of the building. All the videos that I saw were taken in a manner that showed the south side and the east side, but not the other two sides. So it would be helpful and very important to get videos that you could sequence the whole thing from every side of the building, so that you knew exactly the order in which the events took place. Then there's the audio evidence, the evidence of the explosions, the sound to be coordinated with the explosions. When did the explosions occur? When do you get the sound relative to the explosions? How do you relate those two events to one another so that you can get an idea of whether the squibs that we're seeing were caused by explosions? I can't imagine that they were caused by anything else. I think the only other argument that's been put forward would be the heater explosions. But the heaters are explosions of petroleum products. Those are not high explosive devices that are capable of causing those kinds of squibs. Then you want the eyewitness reports from hopefully while the events are fresh in people's minds, so you can compile an oral history of what people observed. And then you are beginning to put together a scientific investigation of what happened. Try to keep the politics out of it. Try to keep the accusations and the blame that is inevitably going to be thrown around out of it. We just want to look at the science. We just want to see what happened so that we can explain what caused the buildings to fail. That's what we're interested in.
Well, Dan, same question to you. If you were on this team, what would you be looking for as you went over the rubble pile?
Well, all of those things, plus I would do collect samples of the dust from as many places from 360 degrees around the site, because there was a lot of, I think the proper word is pyroclastic dust that was expelled out. So you collect the dust because that will have some residue of something that shows, possibly will show anyway. And then We have in our country NFPA, I think it's 921, which is the standard for what to do when with this kind of thing. It says, and the first thing it says is that you don't throw anything away. You you do a thorough investigation. You collect samples of everything. You measure everything that you possibly can. You photograph. All of that is what you do, and you do it as thoroughly and as comprehensively as possible. And I think Roland covered the rest of it. Collect the dust. That's the main thing that I think that Roland didn't say.
Well,
because remember, we got a lot of information from dust samples from 9/11.
Right. Now we got 119. We got the mirror of 9/11 that just happened here. And part of what complicates this, I don't even think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't even think we're allowed to even travel to Iran as Americans right now. So it's going to be very difficult for us to go ahead and collect dust and do all of the necessary forensic investigation that we need to do at AE 9/11 Truth as we look into this building. And it's interesting to us. We want to know more about this because our supporters are interested. They've been sending us emails about it, asking us about that. Now, one of the things that comes up is that, we've said for a long time no steel frame high-rise has ever collapsed because of fire before. And now here's a steel frame high-rise that allegedly collapsed because of fire. Again, we don't even have an official story yet. We got some real suspicions about this building based on the video evidence of the explosions going off far below that. But people will say, no, doesn't this debunk what you've been saying for years? I say, heck no, because forgetting about Plasco for a moment, forgetting about the issue of precedence, this doesn't even touch the problem we have with Building 7, where they're claiming that raging fires were going on in the area of collapse initiation, and the photographic evidence shows those fires were out. I mean, this whole theory depends on there being raging fires going on, and they weren't going on. This analysis is wrong in that case. It doesn't get into the physics of the building destructions, the lack of deceleration on the top block as it meets the lower block in the case of the Twin Towers. It doesn't get into the free fall of Building 7. It doesn't get into the fact that, again, I mean, forgetting 9/11 ever happened, take it out of the equation, even if you wanted to believe the Iranian official story, which, again, there is no official story yet, it would have taken until 2017 for something like this to happen, where they're talking now about the weak structure and all of these excuses that they're putting up there because they want to go after the mayor, a lot of the citizens. So it would have taken a long time for something like this to happen, which goes to show you that it doesn't happen very often. I mean, the greater percentage of time, they do not fall over, right? So that's if you believe the Iranian story. And in the case of 9/11, we have it happening 3 times in one morning. There's a problem with that. A normal investigator would not just shrug his shoulders and say, well, there's a first time for everything. I guess in this case, there's a first 3 times for everything happening within 8 hours of each other. It doesn't get into the temperatures that were achieved, the melted steel at the site on 9/11. It doesn't get into the chemical signature of nanothermite found in the dust. So, I mean, even if, we want to just take precedence out of the equation right now, we still have evidence that would hold up in court that proves these 3 buildings were brought down in controlled demolitions. And then when you look at all the questions that we're now raising about the Iranian building collapse, that puts precedence back into the equation. But, I mean, our argument is still solid. Our argument still stands because you can forget about precedents. Look at all of these other things. This is evidence that definitely justifies a new investigation. And, of course, all of the things that NIST got wrong in their analysis, it's been documented here many times on this show, documented by AE 9/11 Truth. These things can't simply be ignored because some building fell down in Iran last Thursday. And I think a lot of the people that oppose us want these questions to go away, want this evidence to go away just because the Plasco Building fell down. Well, it's not going to. We're going to keep on talking about it. And our case is still very strong, even if you forget about Plasco and the question of precedence.
Absolutely.
I'm going to ask you guys to elaborate on that if you want to. We'll start with Dan.
No, I think you're absolutely right. We absolutely have a case to look for a new investigation for 9/11 because we had 3 unprecedented collapses on one day, as you say, within 8 hours, and in fact, nobody in our government has looked at that seriously, and that's a shame. Nobody in the architectural community, and as an architect, I'm embarrassed, which I've pointed out at a couple of AIA conventions, and I've written to my AIA organization, and I've written to the architecture press and said, you're falling down on your duty, guys. Come on. What are you there for? We need to be more active in looking at stuff that's going on in the world. And so stuff happens, and we need to take a look at it. And we need to be aware of the wake-up calls. So, Andy, I really appreciate what you do with this series. So thank you.
Well, thank you, because it's your expertise that a lot of the series is rested upon, and that educates so many people. Yours and Roland's. Roland, what do you think about the points that I made in relation to Plasco and 9/11?
You're right. There's no reason to question what we've been doing in regard to 9/11 as it relates to this. If this is an attempt to convince the public that what we've been saying about 9/11 is wrong, it's an absolute failure. It doesn't even begin to hold water. So it has the appearance, upon first sight, for people that might not be informed, that we haven't reached with our message, that don't understand the science behind what we're putting forward. It might appeal to them momentarily. As soon as they come into contact with the facts, though, if they're open-minded about it, if they're willing to consider this, if they haven't already made up their mind, they're going to be dissuaded, because what we saw on 9/11 and what happened here are only vaguely related. In the first place, the construction of the buildings on 9/11 was quite different than the construction of this building that we saw in Tehran. And the methods that were used to bring it down had to be a lot more elaborate, because we're talking about 110-story buildings versus 17-story buildings or 15-story building. The preparations for the destruction of the buildings on 9/11 had to be much more rigorous than the procedures that were used to bring down the building in Tehran. So I don't buy the idea that this is an argument that is going to convince people that what we've been saying about 9/11 is all wrong. I don't agree with that at all. I don't think that anybody that looks at the facts is going to be persuaded by that argument. However, what we're up against is a culture that depends upon people being misinformed about science and scientific method. And we see that across the board. It's not just in engineering and the hard sciences. We're seeing it in other fields as well. So in a world that's in crisis, the first thing you want to do is take away people's ability to understand what's going on, if you can. And that's, in essence, what we're trying to fight against. We're trying to say there's a scientific method. We need to follow it. If we follow it, we'll understand what happened in reality, and from that we can base our judgments and decisions about what to do from there. And if we can't get to the bare facts of what happened, then we'll never be able to make sound judgments about anything else.
So we've only got a few minutes left here. In 1 minute, we'll start with Roland. What would you have to say to the people in Iran right now about the need to question, the authority here, question whatever official story they're being given, in terms of if they tell you that there were no explosives used? What would you say to those people as they look at the aftermath of this tragedy?
Well, in the first place, we want to offer my condolences to the people that are affected here, the people that lost family members and people that were injured, and the huge disruption that's going to cause in people's lives. However, I think once that has been recognized, people need to stand back and look at things with an objective eye. Demand the government conduct the investigation that they claim that they're going to do, and make sure that it is thorough. Then you'll be able to look at the facts. Without those facts, you can't hold anybody accountable.
Dan, what would you have to say to the people of Iran?
Well, first of all, incredibly sorry for the loss of life and the loss of businesses, because dozens of businessmen and women lost their businesses in that. But then, as Roland says, press people in power, in positions of leadership, to do what needs to be done to figure out what happened and why, and to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And do it thoroughly and take as long as is needed, and don't skimp on it. Don't rush it. Don't rush to judgment. Don't try to do it on a limited budget. We've seen the results of that here. Trying to push things too fast and with no money, and trying to hide behind things and to make excuses. Don't allow that to happen. Don't allow, say, the mayor of Tehran to make excuses. Just make sure that everything's done thoroughly and completely, and that nothing's missed. And then make sure that the results of the study are promulgated and made public, and then that the results turn into positive action so that it doesn't happen again.
Well, those are words to end it on. We'll be looking into this more here, and I want to thank you guys for the work you've done already and looking into it, and for all your future contributions on this issue, the important 9/11 truth issue, which is what we're keeping our eye on here. And thanks for your time today to discuss this.
Thank you, Andy.
This program is on every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also keep track of the archives by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and good luck.